Yes.
Great.
Tracy will be very happy. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Marilyn London, membership chairman and board member of the Friends of the Stirling Road Library. And looking around, I see you're all friends as well. So thank you so much for your generous and loyal support. And because of that, we are able to be lucky enough to have Shelly join us. If there is anybody here who is not a friend and is a guest today, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you like our program, and please check us out at www.stirlingfriends.org. You'll see how the programs we offer are awesome, and you will hopefully want to become a friend as well. So contact us. In the meantime, I'm getting you back to Joyce, who will tell you about the exciting programs for December. Joyce?
Thank you, Marilyn. Give me half a second here. I'm going to let you know there we go. All right. So our very first one is apropos. It tells us about tonight with Shelly, and the movie is Martin and Elena, as everybody knows. And then in December 22nd, the second movie of the month, and it's What's in a Name, and it's an adaptation of an award-winning play, Le Prénom. Vincent is successful, 40-something, and he's about to become a father for the first time. And while waiting for his spouse at a friends and family dinner, he is bombarded with questions where the answers lead to chaos. So for sure, join us on December 22nd. We also have Dr. Batya Cohn, December 13th, Monday, for a discussion on Eagle by Robert Rauschenberg. On December 19th, the Hollywood Historical Society will be presenting Ready to Rock, Memories of the Hollywood Sportatorium, presented by Stacey Adams, who was an author and a Hollywood Historical Society board member. Of course, we have our yoga, our virtual yoga, starting, well, we've already had the first 2 weeks, but then December 15th and 22nd from 11 to 12. And the New Yorker discussion group, there's one tomorrow night, the 16th and the 23rd, and that's at 7 o'clock. And that's where everybody's opinions are welcomed, and a fantastic discussion always ensues. And then we have the book discussion with Linda Levin, Tuesday, December the 21st. The book is The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. And Linda is always fascinating to listen to and to have open discussion with. And that would be it for December. So we look forward, and as Marilyn had said, go to our website, www.stirlingfriends.org. And that's it, Marilyn. If I could get the cursor to go to stop share, but I can't. You can. Oop. There we go. It's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Joyce. Well, it makes it so much more interesting to actually see the flyers rather than just say it. So I thank you for doing this. And now back to Shelly. Shelly, we are anxiously awaiting to hear your take on another class struggle, Martin Eden. I found it a really riveting movie, and I'm waiting to hear what you have to say. So Shelly, take it away.
Thank you, Marilyn. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving. It's nice to see names, faces. It's great to have you all back here again. Anyway, tonight's discussion, Martin Eden. It is from 2019. Interestingly, it had just premiered just as COVID came in. Very interestingly, so it really didn't make the progress it should have as a film. It's from Italy. It had won numerous awards in Italy at the Venice Film Festival. It won Best Actor. The David Di Donatello Awards, which are the Italian Academy Awards. It won Best Screenplay and had over 10 nominations as well. And it won a number of awards throughout Europe before coming to our shores. Anyway, it was directed by a young man. His name is Pietro Marcello. And Pietro Marcello was a documentary filmmaker since 2004. And this was his first narrative feature film. His first narrative feature film, which he also co-wrote, adapted actually. And I thought he did an incredible job for a first feature. The star of the film, his name is Luca Marinelli, who plays Martin Eden, won the Best Actor Award at the Venice Film Festival. Anyway, this epic film, and it is an epic, is based on a 1909 novel of the same name by Jack London. And it's emblematic. For me, it was very emblematic. Oh, what happened there? Joy, did something happen? Oops.
Wow, I don't know. I'm out of it.
Something's on my screen. It says join a live demo.
Yeah, mine too. I don't understand that.
Stanley Wharton's screen. Stanley, could you take out the
Stanley's
screen?
there. What is going on?
All right, wait a minute. There. Okay, I figured it out.
All right, there
Okay,
you're back.
sorry about that. I don't. Anyway, it's based on 1909 novel by the same name by Jack London. It's emblematic, especially for me, of the great Italian cinema of the 60s and 70s. For those of you who remember the great directors at that time, not just Fellini, but namely Luchino Visconti. He directed The Leopard, The Damned, Death in Venice, and Rocco and His Brothers, almost all in succession. And he was also a great opera director. And this has that sweep, that operatic sweep that Visconti would apply to a film. And I'm sure he was an influence on Marcello. And yet this film could not be more resonant than it is now. You know, especially coming from a novel of 1909, it really resonates. The ideas that he puts into the film from the novel, he maintained much of the original plot, but instead of setting it in the original Oakland, California, where the book was set, this film is transferred to Naples during an indeterminate time. Now, there's no time. It seems to be like the sweep of the 20th century is what he was doing here, because we feel like we're back in the 20s at one point, and we're in the 30s, the 40s, the clothing, the cars. There's a TV set that shows up. I mean, there are so many different little objects that keep coming in and out, and we don't exactly know where we are because he skips through the 20th century, mixing archival documentary footage at the beginning and also during the course of the film. If you remember from the early part of the century, the film opens up with these early scenes of demonstrations and people, you know, there is the revolutionary at the beginning. His name was Errico Malatesta, and his throngs listening to him as he's speaking. It nods at larger historical forces at work as Martin falls under the spell of and then rejects socialism to embrace an annihilating individualism. Is what ultimately happens in the film. He embraces individualism, and he also has almost an affair with fascism. Anyway, it has lush, colorful, and artistic production values from the costume design. So the costumes were terrific. The cinematography was sweeping. The close-ups, especially Martin Eden, and the way he was shot, he looked massive at times, and then all of a sudden it brings him down to earth, and he's the same size as Elena at certain points. The way the camera treats him, and the locations, the music was really all over the place. Not to mention the performances in the film. You know, Martin Eden is born into an impoverished family. And he goes to sea, in the book, he goes to sea at 11, We don't see that, but we know he had become a seaman by this time. He struggles to rise above his station in life through a passionate pursuit of self-education, hoping to become an author and achieve a place among the literary elite. When we first meet him, we see him as this burly, rough creature with great appetites, which by the way, there's that scene, and everybody, I know even the critics, people I know, there's that scene of that man devouring the octopus. If you remember, there's that shot of a guy just devouring a live octopus. And it sort of means a lot of things. To me, remember at that time, Upton Sinclair had written a book called The Octopus, which was about how industry was taking over. And he was a socialist. And there was also the idea of man of great appetites, devouring the world, so to speak. Anyway, we see him as this character, and his entrance into the film is marked by both sex and violence. First, he picks up a young woman, Margarita, who he sees at the bar, and takes her back to the port. And she will reappear several times throughout the film. If you remember, at one point, she's a waitress on the ferry when Martin is there with Elena and their friends. Later on, he sees her when she's with another man who he has a fight with. And then still later on, she comes when he has become wealthy late in the film. Anyway, he makes love to her on a boat, that's at the dock under the cover of night. Then as he wakes up, he sees that defenseless young man being beaten, being bullied on the dock nearby, and he saves him. He takes him back to his family, the wealthy bourgeois Orsini's. It's here that Martin's troubles and his opportunities will burst into life, literally. He meets and is beguiled by Elena. If you remember, she walks into the scene. I love the way it's photographed. He's looking around the room. He sees Baudelaire on the shelves. He sees the globe, and in walks Elena in a blur. She comes through in a blur, that entrance. And as she becomes focused to him, it's evident upon their first meeting that not only, is he falling in love with her at first sight, but they are from two different worlds. It would be impossible, we will learn later, at that point, for them to marry unless he can attain a higher level of wealth and refinement and prove himself to Elena's family. If you remember at that first meeting, he sits down and he eats, and he's wiping the plate with the bread, and explaining to them who he is, but this was Jack London. It's interesting because this is at his most autobiographical. This was, in a sense, what Jack London was like. And much like another film adapted from a book written at the same time, and I was discussing this before, if you remember, think back to one of our earlier films, A Fortunate Man. Both these films ask the same questions. In an unjust age, how does one scale the heights of social class? Is it enough to be ambitious and to believe with a raging heart that you deserve to be raised up? Or if you prove yourself intellectually, is that enough? The literature of the early 20th century reflected these anxieties of men seeking to remake themselves in the images of what they beheld, the world that they saw before them. It's best reflected in Martin Eden when he says to Elena, that sentence near the beginning, he says, "I decided I want to be like you." And her reply was, "Mr. Eden, what you need is an education. Over a period of years, Martin promises Elena that he will accomplish these goals. He's yearning to break free of the chains of poverty, and there will be challenges along the way. When he's not at sea, he lives with his sister and her family in a cheerless, suffocating house with a brother-in-law that eschews the Italian machismo idea and is always coming up with new schemes and fighting with Martin about them. And Martin feels penned in by all of this through both publishing. He buys a typewriter. He buys books. Remember those booksellers? I love it, as if he's going to be famous. Through both publishers' rejections and a growing impatience from Elena, as well as becoming involved in socialist circles under the influence of an elderly intellectual, Russ Brissenden. Remember the tuberculin Russ Brissenden. While many of Jack London's books and stories have been romanticized beyond their true intent, this is an inspired and intellectually fulfilling and visually stunning film, as well as a radical adaptation. And what I mentioned before, the use of archival footage, the way it cuts in and out of time. We feel like Martin Eden is a time traveler, spanning the 20th century. As the story of this rugged individualist with ambitions and overreaching dreams in the face of hard concrete realities, it attains a new relevance with its respect to class warfare. We see the strikes, we see the workers, we see, the salons at the Orsini's. We see also that club that Russ Brissenden takes him to, with tremendous sweep. We're never sure where we are in time, for we could be in any area of Italian history of this past century. The constant debates of left against right and the needs of the collective versus the force of individual will. The visual style of the film covers it all. Clothes that seem right for the 1920s, a soundtrack with music reflective of Europop, and then the 70s and the 80s, cars and televisions are reflective of that same period. As for Martin, Luca Marinelli, his performance is nothing less than stellar. He embodies Martin with physical crudeness, yet his eyes burn with desire. I love it. His hair flops over. He burns with desire for Elena and the ambition to scale the heights of that social class. He's constantly trying to break free. He grows and transforms, even invoking what is known as the Nietzschean concept of man, almost to become godlike. As we watch him proceed with his mad plan, which is mad in many ways, feverish, he takes a room in the country with a widow he meets on the train and her children. And although they are not a love match by any means, she sees the qualities in him that of knowing that he will become great. He will fulfill promise. And later in the story, she becomes rewarded for how she sticks by him during that period. There's an exciting spontaneity to the film, each step of the way. Many of the characters Martin brushes up with, the philosophical ideas that are tossed around during the film, the fights, the lovers, each experience is unexpected and we catch it on the fly. I mean, it comes and it goes and we keep moving. Martin is a force. He just keeps moving. We're caught off guard by some of the interruptions of those clips in sepia and black and white, as if they furnish a background to the grand struggle. And how do they fit in is a mystery. The workers, the parades, the person, the guy eating the octopus, all of it. It's all ambiguity. It can be taken in so many different ways. Yet it reigns supreme over the film. All of these people, it is the sweep of history. And the relationship between Martin and Elena seems to be both a romance and yet also an anti-romance. When Elena criticizes his work, if you remember, when she first looks at his work, she criticizes his work as having too much death and pain. Your work has too much death and pain. He counters that by taking her into downtown Naples with the gangsters, the prostitutes, and the pimps. And that's when the film transfers to that jostling handheld style of filmmaking. We see the dances, those kid dancers, if you remember, those two beautiful kids that don't stop dancing. But we see him get into a fight, and Margarita is there, the woman he makes love to at the beginning. There are bouts in the film filled with political intent. the debates over the collective, as I said, versus the free will, striking workers, Martin deriding a crowd as slaves. Remember, he stands in front of them and he calls them slaves. And at a dinner with the Orsini's, he growls at them and the liberal establishment and the farce of democracy. He calls it a farce at that one man who's running for government. He sounds like a fascist at that point. And in fact, late in the film, if you remember, we see a bald man in a cafe standing up and toasting Martin. And he looks a lot like Mussolini. And there is his relationship again with Russ Brissenden. As in the original novel, we find him studying, if you remember, he is studying a particular author, philosopher, Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was very fashionable in the late 19th and early 20th century, even though now he's half forgotten. He is the one, not Darwin. Herbert Spencer coined the phrase survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. It was Herbert Spencer. And it gives notion to how we see Martin in the film, because he swings from left to right, from socialism to fascism and everywhere in between, in the hands of a director that creates confusing politics. We don't really know where he stands at certain times. It's a good thing, because if a director just wants to inject his own politics into a film, then it becomes too, it starts banging us over the head. Whereas here, it comes from all sides. We're left to wonder, to keep it unclear, to see how Martin is subject. He becomes, impressionable to all sides. And finally, when he's ready to visit America, he tells his admiring readers, remember at that lecture, that the writer Martin Eden does not exist. He does not exist. He's only a hoodlum and a sailor, and success has taken him. He derides the notion of fame. He derides everything he's come to. It's all a sham to him. And the film is that broad view, that collision of these ideas, the visuals that befit him, a man who is never still. He never sits still. Even when he is sitting, he is talking to the tape recorder, he's recording his story. And finally, we are left with a man as if sprung from a Fellini film, announcing, remember that man on the beach towards the end? We see the black shirts in the corner. Where are we? And we see a man standing on a shore announcing that the war has started. A war has started. What war? Where? For people like Martin, there is always war. There is always war, whether it is a class struggle, an economic struggle, an intellectual struggle, a philosophical struggle. There is always a war. At first, we fall for Martin and we root for him, falling like Elena did under his spell. But as his journey devolves into tragedy, connecting his individual triumphant will to what sounds and looks like fascism, the director, Pietro Marcello, creates a message that resonates with devastating truth when you think about it, revealing that we are seduced by a charismatic man who has absolutely nothing to offer, who has absolutely nothing to offer, making this film more resonant than we can imagine. Yes, it's Italian, and it is reflective of what happened in Italy. Think Berlusconi. Back in the 60s, Berlusconi would entertain the populace with women jiggling on screen. He would sell sex, to get people's attention. And then his government became more and more corrupt. And that's late in the 20th century. In the early 20th century, we had Mussolini. So Italy was always subject to this. So he picked this novel, a great American novel, and he said, it's universal. It's universal, and the story is. I mean, there are so many great scenes in the film. I love it later on in the film. His brother-in-law has become successful and only wants Martin to help him promote the products. Stand here, the great Martin Eden. He's reduced to a brand. He's reduced to a brand. It's not what he saw in life, yet it's what he becomes. It's what he becomes. And finally, Elena, he rejects Elena in the end, and her mother comes for her. Her mother doesn't seem to age in the film, if you remember. And they go downstairs, and she whisks her off away from the home, away from Martin's palatial home. All of that, and that friend he has. Remember the friend from early on who works with him at that steel mill or whatever it is, and later on he's with him at the mansion. He is still with him. And he takes out money and he gives it to politicians during the film on the beach when the car stops. We don't know who he's giving it to. We don't know what he's supporting at that point. So it's interesting to watch his rise and fall. And as I said, it does relate in certain ways to A Fortunate Man. We saw, although in A Fortunate Man, we saw someone full of arrogance at the beginning, very different character, but someone who also wanted to rise in class and didn't approach it the way Martin did. We saw Martin approach it differently. He wants to learn and make himself a part of it before he decides to tear it all apart. But both of them wind up in the same place at the end. A rise and fall, a rise and fall. Okay, so now I'd like to open it up to anybody who has comments, things they want to say about the film, because I think this film invites discussion. So raise your hand and we'll get you right in there. You have a little yellow hand that exists somewhere in here. Reactions, I think it's in reactions. You can raise it, or yes. Okay. Anybody want to jump in? Come on, somebody has something to say about it.
Yeah, this is Wendy Rockfield.
Hi, Wendy.
What I was thinking was that Martin Eden came from lower class seaman, and when he met Elena, he wanted to improve himself, and he did. He climbed all the rungs. He tried as hard as he could, and when he finally achieved success, he wasn't comfortable with it. No matter what happened in his life and the success he did attain on his own, and she, when he was finally successful, accepted him, and he didn't accept her because he still wasn't comfortable with an upper class person. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, well, he wasn't, not only wasn't he comfortable, I think he was disillusioned. His illusions were, he saw all of this and he thought he wanted it, and isn't always be careful what you wish for. Yeah, Marilyn, you wanted to say something?
It reminds me of the song, I think I remember Peggy, somebody, is this all there is?
Yes, yes.
You finally get what you think you want, and you look around and you say,
is that all there is?
Peggy Lee.
Is that all there is, right, Wendy? Is that all there is?
Peggy Lee.
Yeah, Peggy Lee, thank you. It was, yeah, exactly. It's because, and not just because of himself, it was because of the people around him. It was, he looked at them and he said, he saw what they represented at certain times and he felt that they were empty. It just didn't, when he got there, this is not what I really want. This is not what I thought it would be. Not what I thought it would be. And therefore, disillusionment. Barbara Tate, I see your hand.
I was jostled by the suddenness of the transformation. When we're going along, and then all of a sudden, and I thought, well, maybe my head turned. Maybe I missed a minute of the film because all of a sudden, he's in this lavish house, and physically he has degenerated. He has those terrible teeth. and greasy hair and the bags under his eyes, and he's such a, you know, a beautiful young man.
Well, that's a great comment, because it's meant to do that. It's meant to you know, because it sort of skips ahead 20 years. We feel like we've skipped 20 years in his life, but yet it doesn't feel that way at a certain point. But I think it was to do that. He does jostle us into, okay, he's made it. You know, he's had this meteoric rise, and he's having a duel. Remember, that was at a point where he's having the duel, and he has to be dragged off. And yes, his teeth are bad. He's degenerated to a certain extent. It's very interesting the way he treats that filmically. Yeah, Marilyn.
I think that at some point he sort of felt that people didn't value him for his work. They only valued him for his fame. And I think that was very disillusioning for him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted his writing to be taken seriously. And it was questioned at certain points. And he felt these people don't really understand who I am. And he lost himself. He lost himself in that society, is what happens. Jackie?
I actually thought that the movie had a lot of potential, but it lost a lot because it was so frantic and it was so chaotic. And that actually bothered me. I think the point it could have made was lost in the explosive translation of it.
Okay. I mean, I can understand that. But I thought, you know, it had such sweep that I think, you know, it's, again, you know, I'll always say this. You have to see a film more than once. You know, the first time you watch it, the second time you see it, and you begin to look at characters. You begin to pick out those parts which you thought you may have missed, which may have more emphasis for you. And I think that's what happens here. It has such sweep. It has, you know, it has so many different filmic elements. You know, the black and white, the sepia, the archival, the different time periods. You know, he turns Martin into a time traveler. So what is really happening is, yes, you can get lost in there. Where am I at this moment? And when you go back and you look at it, you see where you are. You'll see certain ideas come forth. It's, you know, because it is novelistic in many ways. And you know, it's like going back and rereading passages. I think it begs that in terms of its scope. But I can understand your feelings and appreciate them. Thank you. Ed. You have to unmute, Ed. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Now, actually, it's Ed and Alice, and this is I don't see. Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So what I was interested in is finding out about the when he published the other man's poem. First of all, he had promised not to reveal it to anyone else. So did that expire after the guy died? And then also, his audience seemed to insist that it must be his.
Yeah, actually, the poem that he reads for her is T.S. Eliot. It was T.S. Eliot. He stole T.S. Eliot, but he won't admit to it. No, he won't reveal it. But he steals. He does steal. It's interesting. In the book, that also comes out. A lot of the novel is in the film. If you were to read, you know, Jack London's Martin Eden, which is a great book, which was criticized a great deal at the time. You know, it came up. There was another character who we were all familiar with that came up during that time, Horatio Alger. The Horatio Alger stories. You know, was about a man, you know, seeking to raise himself in class and become a success. But he steals T.S. Eliot's poem. at that period in time.
Okay, so in the Jack London book, he steals the poem?
Yes,
Or did,
yes.
so then did Martin publish that guy's poem or just use his name to publish Eliot's poem?
He used his name to in the story. He uses his name to publish the poem. And there was also the idea within the book that Russ had written some of this stuff, and he took it from Russ. Remember, there's also Russ says to him when he's dying, he says to him, "Take it, publish it under your name, publish it under your name." So it's unclear whether it's Russ. Where did Russ get it? All of these, it's ambiguous as to where it comes from. But when I was reading about it, turns out that it was T.S. Eliot that he steals.
Well, it could be Russ had his own poem. Maybe that's part of the ambiguity, but
Yeah.
published.
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Who else wants to jump in? Anybody else have a comment? Want to say anything about the film?
I do.
Yes, Wendy.
I thought the most human thing that he did when he and Marcella were in that little house and she hung out the laundry and it started to rain and she ran out to collect all the laundry, take the clothespins off, and he ran out with a plastic tarmac to shield the clothes. That was such a genuine, sweet, humanistic thing to do, which wasn't really part of his character.
Yeah, well, it was, that's the beauty of the character is, we recognize their flaws. We recognize they have, it's as if he's reaching back into something within him. There is a soul in there. And he had a soul. He had a passionate soul. Where it was going, we don't know. It was going in a lot of different directions. And I think that's part of who he was, it was the ability to be in touch with that part of himself, to care. I mean, when he's on the train, she's looking at him, he's looking at her, and he's looking at the kids. He's relating to the children at one point, and maybe seeing himself as a child, seeing this mother. Is we never really know who his parents were. Is this the mother he wanted? Is this the mother he knew? All of these things come up within the story itself. It resonates with us. We can read into it, if we will. What's affecting him at any given moment. Why he's reacting a certain way. Why was in the beginning we can understand his attachment to Margarita, to the girl he makes love to. And then when he sees her on the boat, he pretends not to know her. Remember? He just makes an order and pretends not to know her. And she looks and she doesn't make a stink. She could have said, "What's the matter? Don't you remember me?" And doesn't, just walks away and fills the order.
But he was climbing the rungs to a better society than the one he came from.
Yes, but he took her later on. He takes her back in, as an assistant. Yeah.
Achieved his success.
He sort of brought people with him. That friend he had in the early days, working in the mill, or wherever it was. Remember the guy that didn't pay them? They beat him up and they take the money.
Yes.
That guy comes with him. Later on he's there. So we see these characters reappear, and because he cares, it in a sense shows I don't forget where I came from. He never forgot where he came from, but it wasn't like he wanted to make the past disappear. He took the past with him. He took it with him.
He also
Marilyn?
had a very nice relationship with his sister.
Yes.
And there was real love there. I mean, the brother-in-law was what he was, but I felt real love between the siblings.
Yes, she wanted to help him. She took him in. I think it was important to her. I think they did, they did love each other. So there is something about family. There is something there we have to read in about family. He certainly didn't like his brother-in-law, or really his brother-in-law that didn't like him. He felt he was lazy, he didn't want to work, with the writing, what are you doing? Because he was not interested in the intellectual side at all.
He's wearing a
He
robe,
He didn't
Yeah,
even
but
want
later-
to use electricity.
a white robe and a black t-shirt.
Right,
Yeah,
right. The
yeah.
machismo Italian. It was, he was sort of representative, he was almost caricatured to a point in the film, to sort of be, this is something, Martin's looking at and saying, I'm not going to be that. I'm not you, and I'm not going to be you. This is what he's fighting against. Yet, when he's with the masses at the beginning, he speaks to them. He speaks to them as, I know who you are, and I know what you want, and what you deserve. And then later on, he rails against them. You're nothing but ignorant slaves.
Exactly.
So it's we see that waffling, that political waffling, that is, that constitutes a person like that, because he really was filtering everything he was beholding, and he didn't know where he fit.
Right.
As Wendy said, and that's really it. He didn't know where he fit anymore by that point in time towards the end. He didn't know where he fit. Anybody else? Yeah, Arlette.
Yeah, when the brother-in-law did not accept him in any way, and he was really miserable towards him. But as the movie escalated, all of a sudden, Martin became something. And then his brother came moseying up to him. Typical of families and situations that take place.
Well,
I loved it
especially-
when he just immediately disregarded him.
Yeah. He was opening up
I
the
can't hear
store
you.
or the warehouse. He was opening up a store or warehouse, and he wanted to make a big deal,
Right.
having Martin there at that point.
No way.
Mhm. Yeah, emblematic of that. Thank you.
So I have a
Anybody?
question.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Sure.
His views politically, was it to show that he didn't know his place? Does it show he believed in the individual. So,
Right.
but that didn't mean that he was against socialism, because there's no belief in the individual there.
Right.
And he wasn't really, I didn't get the impression that he was a fascist, even though there is more, I didn't really know where he stood.
Which is good, because that's indicative of the character of he didn't know where he stood. And he was impressionable. If you remember, he falls under, there is that point where he's working with the intellectual writers, when he comes into that area where they're all writing the newspaper, and he becomes part of that group. And later on, he's against them. He speaks against them. It's, he didn't fit. But I think it's purposeful. I think it's purposeful on the director's part not to clarify, because in a film, when you clarify, you immediately divide your audience. The audience either buys into it, or they say, no, I'm not going to have any of that. So here we're getting all these sides, and we're seeing a character who's impressionable at that. I'm not going to name names, but we've seen politicians who've risen up, who've gone from one party to the other party, right? And
That's
why?
right.
Because they see their ambitions lying in another place. And maybe Martin too was seeing where his ambitions were going, or they were latching on to him. And he said, okay, I'll ride with this one. Even when yeah, Stanley, go ahead.
Do you think in this day and world, he would be classified as a libertarian?
Well, if you're looking at our government, I think he would be a far right individual at the end. He starts out on the left, He winds up going
Yeah.
towards the middle and then winds up on the right. There's that scene in the cafe when they're sitting there and the big bald guy who looks like Mussolini gets up and toasts him for his
Yeah.
feelings. So it's as if these groups were using him at certain points. The same way the brother-in-law was trying to use him, all that the political groups were
Right.
using him.
Mhm.
But Shelley,
So yeah.
I think that Jack London was foreshadowing his future. First, he showed the schooner going down, sinking. And then at
Yes.
the very end, you see him walking into the ocean to his death.
Well, it's a foreshadowing. Yes, the boat sinking is definitely a foreshadowing.
And that was-
And in the end, he's doing what I call a Norman Maine. For those of you who remember A Star Is Born, when James Mason walks off into the ocean.
Yeah.
He's abandoning everything.
Mhm,
He's going back to the sea.
mhm.
He's going back to the sea,
Once he-
where he was essentially born. He was born of the sea, and he goes back to the
Yeah.
sea in the end. Jack London. It's funny, Stanley, that you bring that up because Jack London was of that type. He was part of what was known as Iron John. For those who remember the Iron John Club out in California, there was this group of very rich industrialists and corporate owners who would meet every year at this. They had like a camp where they would get together for a week, and he was part of that. Jack London, mixed with the upper crust of society, and he also mixed with the intelligentsia. He mixed with the writers, and he traveled. He mixed with the lower classes as well. He was all over the place as an individual, and he wound up killing himself. So, in a sense, the ending of the book, the ending of the movie, is like the ending of Jack London. He killed himself.
Yeah.
Marilyn.
Found it ironic in a bit in that even though he was trying to climb the ladder, he really wrote about poverty, and and writing about the poverty made him rich.
Yes. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. It is a great irony.
Point.
He wrote what he knew, where he wrote from where he came from and what he knew, and of life, of that life, which in the film is also takes us back to the post-war period in Italy and neorealism. That's the film explores that. We see scenes that are like neorealism, of poverty, of the demonstrations in the film. So yes, it was writing all of that, and that's what turned Elena off.
Right,
Elena didn't want to read that.
See that with him. I mean, she didn't understand that at all.
No.
Nope.
No.
At all.
Yeah. It's they didn't fit together. Maurice, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes. Do you have any comments? Or could you add something to our knowledge of Herbert Spencer's philosophy?
A little bit. I don't have a lot of it. I've crossed it in a couple of films. I've come across, references to Herbert Spencer, but he arose at the same time as Darwin. He was a contemporary of Darwin's in the Victorian era, and he was, he believed in rugged individualism. He preached it. Which is why he came up with the survival of the fittest, and he believed in overcoming, one's place only if you take the power. If you take the power and rise above, it's up to you as an individual. It's in your hands, and that's about. It was funny because he fell out of favor. He also was basically. Fell into the eugenics category. He believed in eugenics as it came along, the differences in the races, and one superior over the other. So that's why he fell out of favor. You know, he sort of disappeared after a while because a lot of the things he said, people just didn't agree with anymore, and rightfully so. But he did coin the phrase, you know, and I had learned it later on that he had coined the phrase survival of the fittest. It wasn't Darwin. It wasn't
Thank you.
Darwin.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, I hope you got something out of the movie, and you know,
Yeah.
if you know, this will invite you to hopefully look at it again at some time, you know, revisit it. It is a film worth review. I've seen it already 4 times, and each time I look at it, I see different things. I want to see different
Mhm.
things. You know, you really learn who Martin is in the different periods in his life. I mean, it's just, you know, as I think it was Jackie, was it you who said, you know, it just jumps at some point in the middle of the film. You know, where are we? And I think it is on purpose because it doesn't want us. It's an ellipsis. Okay, this is what I call an ellipsis in film. We know things happen. We don't have to have seen them happen, and that's an ellipsis in a film. And we know he's obviously been dragged down to a certain extent. He's obviously been debauched to a certain extent. You know, the way he's dressed, he's slovenly. His teeth are bad. What's become of him? You know, was he doing drugs? You know, what's happened? He's been corrupted. He's been corrupted humanly. And I think he wanted to make short shrift of that to immediately take us to that point. I think we know in stories how people become corrupted like that. And I think he purposely overrides it at that point. But, you know, look at the film. And you can look at it critically the way you did, Jackie. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there are criticisms to be made because how do you take a novel of such scope and make it into a motion picture? You know, he rather than being impressionistic at times becomes expressionistic. You know, we don't see what's going on around Martin so much as we're looking at Martin. We're looking at his face. You know, we're looking at his reactions to what he's seeing as opposed to seeing what he's seeing. We see what he sees through the archival footage at times. We have to take it as this is what he's experiencing. So it has the breadth of a novel. It has the depth and breadth of a novel. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Clara put in a comment in the chat that it was 110 years after Jack London wrote it.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? You know, I like what Linda said. The movie seemed to transfer his inner turmoil to the viewer. Then the music softened it. Yes, it did. The music at times not only it softens it, it's a little, you know, it becomes pop music, and it's sort of like livens it up a little bit. You know, it works counter to the feelings. But also the music provides a little bit of the electricity of what's going on as well. You know, it's, you know, and yes, Helene Mann said he gave a lot of money away as he straddled the 2 classes. Yeah, I think, you know, the money didn't mean anything to him. He just, you know, he got it, and he gave it. He shared it, especially with his friend. You know, remember he gives that friend a lot of money at one point. He wants him to you know, have it. And I love the scenes of him recording at the beginning. You know, it almost has a feel, almost like that a throwback to, you know, films like Citizen Kane, of the great man being brought down, recounting his life. You know, when we see Kane at the beginning, Citizen Kane, we see him walking through that cavernous house. Well, here we see an older Martin Eden talking into that tape recorder. Yeah, Marilyn.
Gail also wrote, success didn't necessarily mean happiness. Is that possibly why he just gave it away? The money.
I think, well, I mean, he money doesn't buy happiness.
No,
Money doesn't buy
he found out-
happiness.
he probably thought it did. But,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, because his success certainly didn't bring him the happiness he thought he was going to get.
And Elena didn't give him the fulfillment of desire. I think he desired her at the beginning. And remember, there's that great scene when he goes to the party at the Orsini's, that outdoor luncheon or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And the Orsini's wanted to mold him at that point. And Orsini has his accountant who came from the lower classes. Remember, he has
Right.
his accountant
said
talk to him.
no.
And he says, you take this route, it's not so bad. You work your way up, you'll have a nice life. And that's not for Martin. That's not for Martin. Martin looks at him and he almost looks down on him at one point, saying, then you're a slave.
Mhm.
It's almost as if later on, when he reflects on it, you become a slave. And he didn't want to become a slave to the Orsini's. Which is really, again, that radical departure from the first dinner, when he's at that dinner where he insults them and he derides them and he says, you're all fake, you're all the bourgeoisie, it's hollow, you look down on those people, but you are standing on those people's shoulders. That's what he's saying. You are standing on top of those people. It is that rugged, you're not allowing them their place in society. You control it. And the guy says to him, you don't sound like you're very liberal in your feelings. The guy addresses him, but you come across as being that. It's interesting. It's interesting if Martin Eden, became the president of Italy, what would he do? What would he do? What kind of character would he become? Because they wanted him in politics and he wanted nothing of it. In the end, he wanted nothing of anything, is basically where he winds up. He winds up
Susan asked
nowhere.
another question in the chart. Do you see it? Helene,
Just a minute.
you think it was a political experiment to merge the classes on Martin's part and was disillusioned?
Merge. When you say, Helene, when you say an experiment, do you mean an experiment on Martin Eden's part?
Yes.
No, I don't know if it was an experiment so much as it was his what he was embracing at any given moment. He didn't want to merge the classes. At one point he was preaching to the choir of strikers, you have to rise up and not be like them. It wasn't a matter of merging with them, but not being like them. So in essence, in order to do that, you have to bring the upper class down. So, it wasn't a matter of merging. I think he was trying to say, that was when he was in the socialism mode, is that, we have to be equals. There has to be an equality happening here. And then later on, when he sees that they're not capable of it, he feels they're no longer capable of this equality. They're acting like slaves. They're letting themselves be taken. So he doesn't see it as emerging anymore. He wants war. He's constantly in this state of war within himself and with society. It is a constant struggle with him. Marilyn said at the beginning, it's a story of class struggle. It's a story of struggle. It's a story of conflict throughout. So that's what we see. So anyone else?
Yes,
Yes,
Alice?
yes.
yeah,
Go ahead.
so the way that I see, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, the way that I see Martin is that he really was never interested in the trappings of wealth, not when he was at the Orsini's house, and apparently not later when he even got his own large house. And that, so that I felt that he very much kept to his principles. And I think what he wanted was to be himself, if not the sailor, just, I don't think he strove to be a rich person. He would have been fine to be in his original life, maybe, you know, in the apartment next to his sisters or something, and write, have it accepted, have it published, be paid for it. That would have satisfied.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting because the scenes during the period when he was living in the rural area with the widow and the children, he seemed very happy. He was writing away, you know, he was sending out the writing constantly, and that's when he finally gets accepted. Remember, one of the stories gets accepted, and he comes to them. You know, she's ecstatic, but he's ecstatic with them. It's, you know, he found a family. You know, he was a surrogate father to these kids. He was in his element, so to speak. And I think that's really what he wanted. You know, when he was looking at the books and at Elena's house, that's what he wanted. He wanted to be a book. He wanted to be a novelist. He wanted to write his stories. He wanted to record what he was seeing. Then when he was on the ship, he was writing away. He had the little notebooks, and he was writing in the notebooks. He was in his happiest moments when he was writing, when he was being Martin Eden, the would-be writer. He wanted to express himself. And what happens is he was expressing everybody else's ideas, and that was not right for him. It made him uncomfortable. It took him out of who he was. And that's what the film was showing. He began expressing other ideas other than who he was. And you're right. That's what led to his eventual wanting to go back to the sea in the end.
You make a good point about the widow, because she wasn't poor. Yeah, she got along okay. So I think that was enough for him. And that's where he was the happiest. When he
Yeah. I mean, the grocer or whoever she was scorned him. Remember, he didn't have enough money to pay. And then later on he does, you know, when he starts writing. But yes, I think he was definitely happier with her than at any other time in the film. I really believe that. Anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. I think Marilyn, I think
This was great. It was wonderful.
yes. I'm so glad for all your comments. You know, it's you know, how you feel. You're not going to have a wrong feeling about a film. You know, it's however you feel is worth us listening to. You know, even somebody, I think it was Stanley, he wore the robe and the black shirt. And yes, that's a comment on the film. It's something that stood out for him. You know, it made a character for him. I like everything you have to say. And even, you know, even if I tend to disagree with you, I'll try and, you know, hopefully express what I think was happening, but I'll appreciate how you feel about it. You know, film is a subjective medium. It's you know, and even the director, and I will tell you this, if you had the director sitting here, if Pietro Marcello was sitting here and you said to him, you know, is this what you were trying to say? He would look at you and he would say, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? And the reason the director does that is because he never wants to be pinned down, because when he does something, there's a lot of meaning to it. And there may be something subconscious or unconscious that he was thinking of at the time. And, you know, you might say something that says, gee, I never thought of that. I never thought of that. So, and some of you did tonight. I think some of you brought out the things the
Awesome.
director may not have thought of. Arlette?
Well, I also, when he saw Elena for the first time, he didn't fall in love with Elena. He fell in love that she was the road to giving him an education, to help him along the way. I don't think he ever loved her because his life was back with the prostitutes and the lower class. And that's when he brought her to reality of his reality. He wanted her to see what he was writing about.
Well, had
He
she
did not love her. He needed
Yeah.
her way to escalate.
you're right. I mean, he said, I want to be like you. I want to be like you. And she says, in that case, you need an education. Now, an education comes with a lot of
right.
things, meaning, I'm opening you up to criticism, to criticize me as much as I should criticize. But she wasn't opening up that way. You remember when they go to the cinema? And of course, we bring cinema into the movies. When they go to the movies, she didn't like the film.
Yeah,
He did. He couldn't understand why she didn't like the film.
you're right.
And then, and he couldn't, when she
Mhm.
says you write of death and you write of bad things, he said, of course, that's the world. Open up
That's
your
right.
eyes. And that's what he wants to do, is open up her eyes. Now, if he could have opened up her eyes, he would have fallen in love with her more. But she fell in love with him.
Yeah.
Because she
Mhm.
saw a man with a great edge. Martin had edges.
Right.
He had edges. And
I
women
think you
like,
saw an underdog who she really, an underdog.
he-
She saw an underdog that she wanted to lift up and help.
well, she saw his ability to lift himself up. And I think she liked his edge, until she was scared of it. She became frightened of it at one point. And that's why he brings back Margarita, that woman at the end, when we see her.
Yeah.
He says, I'm taking you to America. He wanted to take her.
You're right.
Remember, she sort of
Yeah.
understood him. So, yeah.
Oh, she
great,
did.
Great,
She did.
great.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Till we see
You
you
too.
next time.
I will tell you, next month,
Yeah.
we go over to the lighter side. I want to end the year, naturally, in this series. It's not a book, but it's a play. It's still another medium. It's based on a play, and it's a chamber piece. It takes place mainly on one set, and the set itself is part of the story. But it's a wonderful group of characters, a resonant group of characters. Even though they're French, this whole story resonates universally, as you'll see, as it reveals itself. I will tell you no more, but it is
Okay.
people's reactions to what this man will be doing. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. What's in a name? What's in a name?
I'm
And I
sure we
see you-
will.
See you in 2 weeks
Okay.
when we go over it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.